What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome back to the Sooner Surge. Happy Thursday, everyone out there. Very special guest here tonight. Thanks, Surgeaholics, all the Surgeaholics, for being on here tonight. Appreciate you joining. Make sure you check out the Fan Stop at thefanstop.com. Check out their Shirt of the Month Club. We are here tonight, I guess, with Bryan Bedford, CEO of Recruit Route. Knows anything and everything in the NIL world. And for us, just fans out there, I promise you, when we don't know the answer, we got to find people who do. And fortunately, we have the guy who knows it tonight with us in Bryan Bedford. So thanks for joining us, Bryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I'm happy to be here. You guys are my old homeboys, so I'm here to be with you guys tonight. And I'm trying to be a media company, so I've got like Twitter Live and I got Instagram Live. I don't even know what I'm doing here, so I'm trying to keep up with you guys tonight.
Hey, Bryan, why don't you start with we had you on, I think it was 4 or 5 months ago on the live, and it's crazy how much it's changed even since then. Just talk about, as much as you can, the new legislation and maybe some key takeaways for just kind of the novice fans and what we could take away from that legislation.
Yeah, it's a complicated one. Let me try to kind of simplify it for everybody, just so that we can kind of try to make sense of this. So, if you go all the way back to the beginning of name, image, and likeness, I always try to kind of start with the basics. So, back in the day, a guy named Ed O'Bannon sued the NCAA over his name, image, and likeness being in one of the EA games. So just think about the timing of that now with the new video game coming out. And so here we have Ed O'Bannon, played basketball for UCLA, left-handed, 6'8", 6'9", wore the number 31, went to UCLA, and he said, that's me. I deserve mine, right? And all of you guys would have done probably the same thing and said, hey, that's me. I deserve mine. What I don't think he realizes is the unintended consequences of all those things that have really come up. And so, over the last several years, our court system has really, changed fundamentally its position around amateurism. And, that's led to July of 2021, the adoption of NIL, which was kind of, done super quick and kind of in passing if you really think about the timing and how quickly they threw that over the fence. You fast forward to now, all of the things that are happening are really a byproduct of attorneys kind of seeing blood in the water. And the old adage of billable hours wins are undefeated, that's very true in this case. So the House settlement, which got a lot of news and news coverage over the last 10 days in the settlement of the House case, it's actually 3 antitrust cases. And I won't go through each one of those, but in essence, the 3 antitrust cases included a couple of different things that the NCAA and the college leaders, the major Power 4 conferences primarily, but also some other conferences, which has led to actually other lawsuits coming actually from some colleges. And it's done 2 things. The first is that there's a group of players that sued basically for back pay, saying that they deserve to have been paid up until there's a statute of limitations, which I don't think we need to go into all of that, but at some point they felt like they deserve a piece of the pie for NIL and kind of back pay damages, and that back pay penalty is $2.8 billion. So just let that sink in for just a minute. That is the back pay damages. That's not anything going forward. And we're going to talk about going forward because that's a big number too. But the back pay to all those former student athletes is $12.8 billion. It varies depending on the sport and the criteria and the number of years you played and several other things. But in essence, that's that piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle is then, and before I go there, so the majority of that is going to former college football players and former men's basketball players. So in fact, 83% of that back pay will go back to them, which equates to about $12,000 per player in back pay. So just think about it. You're like 25, chilling, doing your own thing, and you jump into a lawsuit and they're going to throw you a $12,000 check. Okay, that's kind of what's happening. All right, so that's, but you have to understand that that's back pay for damages around the use of name, image, and likeness, because what they argued was that the NCAA didn't allow NIL quick enough, and so they sued and got that. Now, what that did is that put a cap, because what the NCAA didn't want is more lawsuits on other people agreeing to the same terms. So they basically said, okay, we'll pay this, but we're not paying any more. Okay, they kind of limited it, and kind of, it's like think of it like arbitration. Okay, because so the second piece of this is then that court case also allowed for, or they kind of boxed the NCAA into really a spot that they have really never wanted to go to, which was, now you have to revenue share with student athletes. Okay. And so this is interesting, kind of depends on your point of view on this. But they agreed to revenue sharing moving forward, but they did that with kind of what a lot of people term a cap. So without it being truly collective bargained, I think they're going to have some issues here with this, and we can get into that a little bit later. But that cap is basically an equation on which takes the value of a scholarship and the value of the television rights fee, and has created kind of an uber value, and then the 22 million is the cash piece of it, and then you've got the scholarship piece of it. Okay. So the majority of that $22 million, let's say, revenue share element per school per year will start in the 26 season. And most are guessing that it'll be between 15 and 16 million of that will go to college football players. Okay, so kind of do the math. Let's say you got 100 guys on your roster. You can start to do the math on kind of what that looks like. It's Jason, I'll take it. If they want to give me that, I'll take that money. That's good money if they want to give it to me. Okay. So the next piece, again, I'm trying to just simplify it for you guys so that it kind of makes sense. The next piece of this that the NCAA did is, well, now that you have revenue sharing, you have to establish kind of rules and processes. So you can't, like, how many people you're going to revenue share with? Like, is there a limit, right? Or is it a free for all, right? And schools have different amounts of players. If you go to OU right now, they probably have about 125, or when school starts, they'll have about 125 guys on their roster. If you went to the University of Tulsa, they might have 110, 105, right? Something like that. So what they had to do is they had to establish a roster cap. And so we've never had this because it's kind of been up to the school based on what they wanted to spend and how much money they had and all those kinds of things. They had to establish a cap so that they knew how much money to share the revenue with. Okay, that makes sense, right? Logically, you think about it, it's like, okay, we can't share with 500 people, so what's the number? So they established caps. Some of those caps are really interesting. Some of them, and if you've been on Twitter or X the last few weeks, you've seen charts floating around with all different numbers. Most of them, a lot of the caps went up, but there's some sports where the caps really hurt them, like women's soccer. The cap actually is a much smaller than what you would typically build a roster off of. At the same time, when you establish a cap, then that basically creates the scholarship threshold now. So they actually don't have scholarship limits. It's just you can scholarship as many players as you have on your roster or not. So when we talk about scholarships, here's the kind of the piece of it. So we're so used to it in college football. They have 85 full scholarships. Now you can have 105 players in football. And since it's football season, I'm sure you guys want to talk about football. But what most people don't realize is they don't have to be on a full scholarship. They could be on a partial scholarship. They could be on 25%. They could be on 50% if they wanted to be. Now, most schools will do, well, we can get into what I think schools will do here in just a minute. That may be your follow-up question. But basically, they can scholarship as many as the caps are in place. And so they set caps for softball and football and baseball and soccer and all the different sports, certainly football. And then the last piece, and the piece that, again, is will take a little bit of work, is that they're really trying to put in strongly worded language and compliance in place to eliminate the pay-to-play kind of NIL model. And if you remember when I was on here last time, I talked about how kind of jacked up that was. I always use the analogy like, you know, if you were a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles, and you know the way the college market works, and we apply that to the Philadelphia Eagles, it'd be like them putting out a tweet saying, you know, chip in $10 so we can pay Jalen Hurts. Just think about how crazy that is. Well, that's kind of what's going on in the college space with crowdsourcing and different things that are going on, and it's become pay to play. The NCAA is like, well, we need to fix that. Well, yeah, no crap. You should have fixed that 3 years ago, but they didn't. So what they're trying to implement now is a clearinghouse and a governance model that and basically a third party arbiter that will look at each of the deals. So what does that mean? Well, they've put in language that basically says you have to disclose the deal now before you can get paid, and we have to. It's kind of like a clearinghouse. And that step has not been in place. It'll be interesting because if you think about this in, you know, if you were a musician and you're at OU and you got, you know, an NIL deal, you wouldn't have that same standard. So, you know, there'll be other attorneys that will litigate against why is the bar for compliance so high. Anyways, it's a very long answer to a very simple question, Jeremy, but those are kind of the four big buckets of stuff that's gone on. And there's certainly a lot of nuance to this that people are learning, how teams build their rosters, manage, pay players, all that kind of stuff will evolve. But it'll be, but it's an interesting time right now. So anyways, there you go. That's the basics of kind of what you need to know. I mean, those are the big four chunky elements of what the House settlement looks like in the last week or so.
Hey, Bryan, I got a follow-up question. So the last thing you touched on about the clearinghouse and arbitration and all that with NIL deals. So do you think with that being the thing they're going forward and doing, don't you think that might lead to some more under-the-table stuff because they don't want to go through that?
Yeah.
Sure. You know, like an NIL deal for, say you're, I don't know.
But just go back to what it was in the 80s. Yes. The answer is yes. It'll just go back to what it used to be.
That's kind of what, yeah.
The bag man.
They don't want to go through the clearinghouse and do all that. They'll just go another way.
Yeah. I mean, let's not be naive. I think what it'll do is it'll streamline some of the other crowdsourcing type stuff that's kind of happened with the average Jimmy and Joe fan, you know, where they're putting the 10 or 15 bucks in a month. I think that will probably that'll evolve. If you look at, you know, like OU came out with One Oklahoma, they were very specific saying we don't want to be called a collective. Well, that was intentional because they actually knew the language that was coming. They want to become a content company. And so there's actually language written in there to where you can monetize like they've written it that way. So like, you know, OU didn't just do that. Like they knew the rule, they knew the language that was coming, guys. Like, that's very intentional what was happening as an example. And you're seeing like Alabama just released their new content company. So like everybody's kind of evolving that piece. But yeah, I mean, if a big booster wants a kid, it'll just kind of go back to the way that we all grew up doing it. Unfortunately, so that probably doesn't go away. But then that becomes like a true compliance issue.
Yeah, kind of on the lines of what Teresa's saying here. So you talked about the scholarship limits. Kind of what are your thoughts on, say, a blue blood in football specifically, the now 105 limit? Kind of compare that to your average power four to below average to even down to that group of five level. Are you going to see teams filling up all 105 and say the blue bloods and then those group of five teams to start taking a hit in the scholarship department because of that?
Yeah. So let me kind of clarify one thing, because I think it speaks to what you're asking, Hunter. The revenue share component that we talked about the back pay, $2.8 billion, all of the schools, including the G5 and everybody, they're all part of that settlement, the back pay piece of it. The $22 million moving forward, that is an opt-in for revenue sharing. So you do not have to opt into that. So this would never happen. So I'm going to say it. Like, if OU didn't want to do revenue sharing, they could opt out if they wanted to. Now, that's not going to happen. So nobody freak out. That's not happening at the University of Oklahoma. But they could. So what will happen out of that is, you know, the Big Ten, the SEC, I think all the Big 12 and the ACC, or whatever that ends up looking like, they will all opt into revenue sharing. The group of five schools will not revenue share. First of all, they don't have $22 million to. There's not enough nickels for them to go wrangle up under their seat cushions, so they won't. So what happens first, before we get into this roster size and scholarships, Hunter, is that the gap will grow even bigger than it has today. And if you're a purist and you love the Tulane beating USC kind of, Cotton Bowl kind of stories from a couple of years ago, those are going to get harder and harder and harder to accomplish, okay? Which is why you're seeing some really crazy and unnatural motions that are happening in college athletics, like SMU going to the ACC and not taking a cut of revenue. It's because it's worth it for them to go do something crazy, because then they're completely out of the game. The group of five will become kind of like what FCS football is today. It'll look like a totally different, it's almost going to become a totally different sport. That pains me, because I think that's a really cool level of football, but it will become very different. That's kind of the sad reality of the situation from at least my perspective. All right, so in addition to revenue sharing, let's talk about rosters. Again, if you're at Ohio State, you're at Michigan, you're at Oklahoma, you will be doing that. Now remember, every time you add a scholarship player or a roster spot on the men's side, you got to add one on the women's side. Okay, or depending on your point of view, vice versa. You think Patty Gasso is not going to get her 25 full scholarships in softball? But you better dang believe it, right? So they're going to add 13 more scholarships in softball. They got to find 13 more on the men's side, right, to counterbalance that. For all you softball fans, because I know we got a big softball audience here, right? So yeah, it works both ways. So your big schools absolutely will do that. Now, the vast majority of that will be kids probably moving in the portals, so it becomes more of a free agency model. You're going to see even more people moving in the portal, because you have a hard enough time trying to play 85 scholarship guys. People get, they got recruited, they got courted, they were the best dude in their county, the best dude in their state, and they sit for a couple years. Well, they go into portal because they're not playing. Most kids go into portal because they're not playing. So you're going to have more movement because you're going to have more guys that are not playing. Okay. Now, with the playoff, you're going to have to play more kids because the season's longer. So hopefully that counterbalances the portal. If you think about it, I don't know how much you guys have talked about the playoff, but you're going to have to play more players. So you're going to have to play, your backups and stuff like that. You're going to have to play more kids earlier in the season for sure. So yes, your OUs and such like that, you're definitely going to be building to that. You may not do it all at once, but you definitely will do it. And then I think if you're at a Tulsa or you're at Tulane or North Texas, you may stick at 85 for a little bit. And then you might have like 5 partials or something like that are kind of like glorified PWOs. Something like that will happen.
Yeah. Hey, I was going to get to Chief T-Bird's question there. I mean, you're always going to have tampering, I think, but the way I understand, I mean, a lot of these NIL deals, Bryan, I mean, if they transfer, a lot of these are going to be a 1-year type deal, right? I mean, it's like I'm here for a year. They're not going to do anything past that, I wouldn't think, at colleges. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I would do a 1-year deal or a 6-month deal, and then I would backload the payment after the bowl game. That's what I would do. So that's kind of how I'd manage it for sure.
I know you answered this earlier. I forget how you phrased it, Bryan, about the back pay stuff, because when I first saw that, I immediately thought, why 2016? And I know the pre-NIL was like 2016 to 2021. Hunter had talked to me earlier about, but there are a couple of questions here in the chat about how that back pay works. Maybe explain. I like how you said it earlier. They basically just said, here, this is where we're going. We're not paying any more than that. But how bad? I mean, so a guy in 2015 is not getting a dime.
Correct. Yeah. They had to set a time, and I don't know where they came up with that per se, but yeah, they had to set a time and the date, and that's what they went with. And so, I think they just had to not do it too far back. I think, that's attorneys working their magic. So I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night, but I am not an attorney. So how they got to that date, I don't know, but I'm sure they just negotiated through like, hey, how far can we push this thing?
Hey, Bryan, collective bargaining, employment, is that coming? Do you think?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that so there's two different answers there, or there's two different thoughts there. Let's take the employment piece first. I mean, that's what the NCAA doesn't want to happen. That's the big thing that they're pushing back on. There's actually some pretty legitimate reasons for that. Like if you take the state of Texas as an example, that's a right to work state. Mm-hmm. And so they can fire you at any time, right? And they don't have to have cause. So think about that. You're 19 and you could get fired. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, that's not exactly what the kids, they signed up to go play football or softball or whatever, right? So, there's actually some pretty legitimate reasons. I mean, you get into, unemployment. I mean, there's just a bunch, insurance. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons why they don't want to do that. So all of the lobbying that you've seen on Capitol Hill through the NCAA, remember Nick Saban going to the cap, and that's lobbying 101, guys. That's all that's very well scripted on Capitol Hill. And so they're trying their best to get Congress to support a special exemption. It depends on who you talk to on how likely that is, and it probably depends on who our next president is, candidly. Because right now, depending on who that is, will probably also dictate the down market seats, both in the Senate and in the Congress. So all of that will have some level of implication on this. So, it's not going to go through now because we're in a presidential season. But if that wasn't the case, they would be really pushing hard on that. I think that's the first shoe, one way or the other, to drop. I've always had it in my brain, Jason, that there's plenty of good congressmen in the South that are going to work on behalf of the SEC and make that happen, or put in a special exemption. Like Congress has done that for the NFL. Like there's precedent where that's been done. Mm-hmm. But that would take some good old boy work. Let's just be very honest. Like that's going to take some very much good old boy work. It doesn't logically make sense to do that. Let me say it that way. But there's lots of things that happen around our government that aren't logical that get put into place. What most attorneys believe, if you talk to them, they do believe that it is trending towards them becoming employees. But I don't think it's every sport. I think it may be the ones that just opt into or are the lion's share of the revenue component. So it may just be football, men's and women's basketball, because those three sports are going to be 95% of the revenue. Mm-hmm. And they may kind of set a bar there based on some sort of equation. But it won't be every sport because they're not getting again, some of that depends on how they do the allocation of the revenue share. So there's a couple of different things that have to kind of get put in place. But that's definitely the fork in the road. The NCAA is absolutely adamant they do not want them to be employees, and they're trying as best they can to prevent that from happening. They may not say that publicly, but just watch the tea leaves with their lobbyists. That's all of that motion. And then that will then determine whether or not they can collective bargaining. Now, the House settlement also has a provision in there to allow future collective bargaining to change the equation. But we're probably a few years away from that. I would think that I would think in calendar year 25, again, depending on our presidential election, which is crazy to think that has implications on all this, but it does. Trust me, it does. I think that they get some clarity in calendar year 25 on employee versus or not. And then I think in probably 26, depending on that'll be about the time that they could collectively bargain. Now, they could collectively bargain without being employees, but it's a cleaner path to do it that way. They would have to kind of, it's a cleaner path if they are. It's just easier for them. But they could opt in and just coalesce, and we've seen some people try to do some things similar to that. But it would take, and you're seeing some third-party groups try to kind of stand up and be kind of a de facto third-party voice of the college student kind of in that gap to be basically, I mean, think of it like a union. So you're seeing some groups that are kind of starting to do that. I think you're probably a year and a half away from that, would be my guess. It's kind of crazy we're even talking about this, guys. I mean, just think about it. We won't even talk about this. So
it's wild. Hey, So let me give you an example. If I was star quarterback, which I've never played quarterback, it wouldn't be, but if I was star quarterback, going to OU, I get an NIL deal from a business, a corporate business, whatever, goes to the clearinghouse, gets denied. Okay. And, or maybe I'm wondering, is there going to be lawsuits from players if, hey, I got denied, this kid from another school got this much money, fair market value? I mean, what are we looking at as far as those arbitrary, the clearinghouses denying NIL deals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, nobody knows the answer to that because they haven't set forth policy on that. I think if it's if it's Nike or Whataburger or something like that, then it will be for market value because they're going to know what they want to spend and what they don't want to spend. And they have a data in between Open Doors and Influencer, and their parent, Teamworks, who's kind of the engine behind all that stuff. I mean, they have all that data, guys. They have all the data. They have all the agencies. They have all that stuff. Literally, with a couple of clicks, they can look all that stuff up. So I think deals like that are, they'll go through, and those won't be an issue. Those kind of deals, the Livy Dunn type stuff that you see at LSU, like that's legit. That is legit brand ambassador, brand endorsement type stuff. Okay. I think what they're ultimately trying to prevent is, the super fan in Columbus, Ohio, that wants to keep a linebacker, a defensive back, and a quarterback on campus, and he's like, "Hey, I'll put $3 million in the collective. Just route that to those three guys." That they're trying to stop from happening. So, but again, let's not be naive. Like, that's been going on for 50 years, 60 years now. So I'm not condoning that, but they'll find a way. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark's got a question here about agents. Mark's envisioning here in the chat. It says he's envisioning something like what happens to musicians in their first contract. Agents maybe up and on coming star players in the future. Is that at all going to be out there? I guess you just got to be cognizant and aware of those things, I guess, as athletes coming up in the college world. But that, and then someone else, I think Jay asked about, I just lost the comment, but Teresa was talking about caps in the future. Is that in the future?
I mean, caps in what way? They've established a cap on the revenue share. They've established a cap on the roster spot. So caps are already there. The future's here. From my perspective, like they've already established caps. If you talk to most player personnel and GMs out there at the major, let's say Power 2 two conferences, everybody talks about the $22 million rev share on the TV, but they can still do NIL deals outside of that. Okay. So most of the big schools, they're planning for they assume that their roster will be managing between the television revenue piece and NIL and brand endorsement and content companies and all that stuff, probably upwards of about $40 million a roster. That's the numbers I'm hearing, between $30 and $40 million. Okay. I'm not going to tell you, but I have that on pretty good authority with the team that wears red and white. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. And I've heard that from some schools that wear orange and black. I've heard it from a couple different schools. Okay. I'll just leave it at that. So I think the numbers are bigger than you think. That's what people have to realize. Like, that's just the TV piece. That is not all the other stuff. If you look at what the collectives are doing now, most of your big collectives, on the high end, they're doing 15 to 20 million now. They've just started. They're like a year and a half into it. They're not even mature. They're like little baby immature businesses, and they're still doing that much volume. So you're seeing more production, content, behind the scenes, 30 for 30s. They're telling more stories. They're running it as a true subscription business, and they'll get into aggregator space, and they'll do all the things that you guys are doing, right? They'll be your competition in a lot of ways for some of this stuff, because they're going to be able to tell stories. They can do exclusive agreements for NIL. They can do some things that'll be really unique. So Teresa, Caps are here. Welcome to the party. And then the question around predatory agents. I mean, my business. So my agency, we teach and work with collectives, and I manage the relationship in Oklahoma with OSSA, and I've written all the rules and all that kind of stuff for NIL in high school. My recruit out business, I mean, I work with recruits all the time. As you guys know, I got kids that are at OU playing. I got kids at Oklahoma State. I got kids at Arkansas. I got kids all over the country that are playing. But I'm not an agent. I don't want to play that game. But they're absolutely happening. If you're a high-end Power 4 prospect now, you are being approached by an agent in high school. So it's absolutely happening. What you hope is that those kids and their parents have some sort of legal counsel. The rate that they're charging for high school NIL is pretty large. It's about a 20% commission. If you compare that to the NFL, I mean, the NFL maybe 3 to 5%. So they're asking a lot more, those high school kids. So you kind of get into that, but that can all be negotiated if you're smart enough to know that you can negotiate. A lot of parents are like, oh, I'll just take the agreement and I'll sign it as is. The reality is you can actually push back. You can change where you want, if you need to do adjudication in the Oklahoma, great. If you want to do it in Delaware, they'll let you do it in Delaware, right? Where do you want to adjudicate? If they do something bad to you, I want to go to court in Tulsa, or I want to go to court in Oklahoma City or Salisbury or whatever. So, so that's absolutely happening. I'd say predatory agents, that's not been anything new, but that is, that's evolving. And then now it's just getting a little bit younger.
Yeah, real quick, back to the kind of salary cap part of it. Oklahoma, kind of one of the first to do it, bringing in Jake Rosenberg, former executive from the Philadelphia Eagles. Do you think that's going to be kind of the norm, either with Rosenberg and his company partnering with other schools outside of just Oklahoma, or other people that kind of have that experience and NFL front offices trying to go into this really uncharted territory of college revenue sharing?
Yeah. Well, I've talked to Jake, so I probably have a unique point of view on this one because I've talked to Jake, and I won't share all of that conversation. But I mean, I think that everybody's trying to figure out where all this goes, and whether it's Jake trying to help them, or my background in recruiting and NIL. Might even see me involved in some stuff down the road. Like, there's all sorts of stuff that are happening because schools are trying to figure out a number of different things. They've got to figure out how do they manage they've got to understand, because they're going from just a pure recruiting, a pure recruiting and player like recruiting has been done the same way it's been done for a long, long time. Absent we've moved to digital video from, Betacam and VHS and stuff like that back in the day, or film, but it's been kind of done the same way for a long, long time. Now you have film and player evaluation and camps and in-person visits and unofficial visits and game day all that whole mechanism is pretty mature, and there's people but now you have to establish value, and that is an element, because value is equated to scarcity of talent by position. So we've always said it's really hard to find good defensive linemen. Like, that's been a comment, right? That everybody is like, hey, that's not one of the hardest positions, or a really good quarterback. Okay, but now what's the true value? What number are we going to put against it? Because you'd put a scholarship against it and say, we're taking 1, we're taking 2. That was the value. Now the value is monetary. So again, you have a pie. How do you allocate the value of that? Some of that will be maybe dictated to you, but there could be other ways that you look at commercial agreements that you may have depending on what they agree to, because they will have student athletes will have the ability to sign exclusive rights to their NIL if they choose to with the school. I probably wouldn't advise that, to do exclusivity to anything. That's kind of not a cool idea, especially if you're a high value player, but it also can change the dynamics on how you're compensated, right? And when you're compensated. So, yeah, it's a complicated one, but yeah, I mean, hopefully it gives you kind of a view of what Jake and guys like them, me, etc. Everybody's trying to figure out player value. How do you put that into your recruiting machine? How do you pay players? Because again, they've never had to pay players. So do they have systems to do that?
Yeah.
Like how are you going to pay them? Are you going to pre-tax them so they don't get dinged on the back end? Are you writing them a check like the NFL? Are you doing direct deposit? Are you doing NFTs? Like, how are you going to do this, right? Are you going to do a mixture of stuff? Are you doing are you going to put some money into retirement for them? Like, there's a lot to figure out here. So again, there's a player acquisition side, there's the player value side, and then there's the player payment side. All of those things have to be sorted out in the college, and I would tell you nobody's got a really good plan for it right now because they never had to do it before.
That's true. That's true. Hey, Bryan, I saw the question go up here, and I was going to ask it. I mean, it's the last question I have, but it's about the walk-ons. You mentioned earlier 105 cap. If you have an 85, you don't have to scholarship 105, but pure walk-on, I don't think we're going to be seeing a whole lot of videos where guys get put on scholarship, probably, right? From a walk-on status.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, nobody knows this answer.
Yeah.
If you're and I think it just depends. I think if you're at, again, Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, you probably got 105 dudes.
Yeah.
Now, there's some challenges with that. I mean, you got to keep 105 guys happy, which creates a bunch of locker room issues. Right. You cannot play 85 dudes right now.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So, do they figure out a way to play more players with an extended longer season because of the playoff? That is a question that I have in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Is, are you playing more players? And if we can play more players, then maybe that's not as big a deal. But man, I've coached, and keeping that many guys happy is freaking difficult, guys. Like, it's hard because at the end of the day, guys just want to play. They just want to play. They got a limited window of time before their eligibility expires, or they get hurt,
mm-hmm.
or they get a JOB, or they get an MR degree, right?
Yep.
So it's like they just want to go play as quick as they can go play. And that is the vast majority of guys. So do I think it ends walk-ons? No. Do I think it evolves walk-ons? Yes. I think it's going to get harder because some of those big schools that were carrying 20 preferred guys, they might carry 5 now.
Yeah.
Maybe 10, maybe, or you have, 95 on full, and you take 5 scholarships and you give 20% to 5 more guys, that gets you to 100, and you got 5 walk-ons, right? And again, because you got to remember, whatever you give on the men's side, you got to give on the women's side. So you got to find a way to balance the numbers because of Title IX.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it will be interesting. And Title IX isn't just scholarships. Title IX is roster spots. This is the thing that got us during COVID a lot. It's because people were like, couldn't travel and there was no visits and people were trying to find spots. And what people figured out is it was, there was very limited roster spots. And because you had all those COVID years that people were stacking, and you had to have the same amount of men's players as women on the team like that. So it's not just scholarships, but it's roster spots have to equal as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's a lot, Bryan. I really appreciate
I tried to simplify it, guys. I tried to simplify it, but it is a lot of information. So hopefully, I don't know if you've had other guests that have tried to dissect the world of recruiting and NIL right now, but I will say this. 8 years ago when I started doing this as just a passion project because I love recruiting and NIL, or recruiting at the time, I never would have thought the portal would open up and we'd have COVID and now NIL. And now I'm like, I think I know this better than 99% of the world now. And I never would have thought that would happen in a million years, but dumb luck gets you sometimes. So there you go.
Well, to answer your question, Bryan, have we had anyone else on for recruiting in NIL? The answer is no, because we don't need to. We have the guy right here if we ever need a question answered. But really appreciate you taking time. Surgeaholics, we'll stay on for about 10 more minutes if you have any other questions concerning anything else tonight. But we're going to let Bryan go. Appreciate him joining us tonight. Surgeaholics, thanks, Bryan. Thank Bryan for being on here tonight for us. Appreciate it.
Let's do another one of these when we get close to National Signing Day. We should do another one of these. And if you need any hot takes on softball, Hunter, hit me up next May. We'll talk. We'll talk softball. You got it. Okay, you got it. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate
it. Hey, real quick. If any of the, did you call them Surgeaholics? I got to remember that.
That's what they call themselves, and we call them that too. Yeah.
Well, maybe I'm waiting on the T-shirt. So whenever you guys are going to send that to me, XL, bros. Listen, you guys, I'm on Twitter. You can follow me at Bryan_Bedford or the Bedford Agency, all online, all that stuff. So if we can help, let us know in any way. We're certainly living in the world of recruiting. We've got some kids that are getting recruited by the Boomer Sooners right now. So lots of fun stuff happening. So if we can help in any way, let us know, guys.
Hey, Bryan, real quick. Cam Little got the job at Jacksonville. That's one of your guys, right?
Well, not only is it one of my guys, that is my nephew.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
so
that's awesome.
So Southmore High School, what would that have been? Class of 21. And then declared early. So after his junior year, here's what's crazy about that. Okay, so he was an All-SEC place kicker last year. They just cut their veteran kicker at Jacksonville, and Cam turned 20 this weekend. Think about that.
That's crazy.
20 years old. My daughter is like a sophomore in college, and she's the same age as him. So they're cousins. But yeah, so great kid and family, and they live right around the corner here. So yeah, great, good people. So we got tons of. I was in Jacksonville like about a month ago, and I bought all sorts of Jags gear because I'm like, where am I ever going to find Jacksonville gear in Oklahoma? Sure. So we're loaded up. We got Jacksonville gear. I think I figured out we say Duval because that's the county that it's in. I did not know why they said Duval. I had to look that up and Google that. But thanks for mentioning that, Jason. We're proud of you.
Yeah. All right, man. Appreciate it, Bryan. Have a good night.
You guys have a good night. See you, boys.
Thanks. There you have it, Surgeaholics. A little insight. Actually, I'll rephrase that. A lot of insight into the world of NIL. The future is here. That's what it's like. And some great questions that were asked and some great answers that were given by Bryan Bedford, who really hinted at a lot of things, touched on a lot of topics NIL-wise. So, again, thanks to Bryan for being on here. What a great 48 minutes. Really appreciate him taking the time on a Thursday evening to do that with us. And thanks you guys for joining us. We got about 10 minutes here, guys. We can open it up to anything and everything these last 10 minutes, Surgeaholics, if you want to talk about some things. Obviously, the Sooners did have their second fall practice today, but anything and everything on the table. If you want to ask some follow-up things, we're here for you for 10 more minutes tonight.
Yeah. Hey, I thought, I mean, obviously the scholarship thing's a big deal. I think everybody wants to talk NIL, but the scholarship thing's a huge deal. And 105 players, I mean, with the transfer portal, I think what you do with those last 20, 25 players is going to be interesting. I mean, obviously, Alabama's, the Oklahomas of the world, I would think are going to be trying to get as many highly recruited guys as they can get. I mean, I think the PWOs, like he said, very limited now at the big time schools. So they're going to be on scholarship. That's why talking about, like, you don't have to put them all on scholarship. I think the big time schools will put them all on scholarship to get them at their university.
And another thing to watch there is it still hasn't been, unless I missed it somewhere in all of this. I mean, it's so much information from all of these lawsuits like Bryan talked about, but I mean, you would have to assume 25 is not going to be the yearly limit anymore in the recruiting classes. You also add in the portal. I mean, you were seeing, feels like the last few years, OU's been taking north of 35 when you're combining the high school recruiting to the transfer portal. So that's another thing. And you also have, like Bryan kind of alluded to, I mean, you can give partial scholarships to players. That's another option. You can be above 105. It just has to, total scholarships has to come down to 105.
Yeah. Hey, Hickman and Williams look good in their interview. Hey, real quick, I want to touch on Hickman for a second. I don't know if anybody watched the Oklahoma breakdown, but Gabe Eicher was talking about BV and how much he loves Josh Bates. He pretty much said, he goes, I think is there more competition there for that starting role than we think? That's interesting to me. I don't think there is. I think it's
Come on, Jay.
I'm just going by way. I'm just asking the question, Jeremy.
I really don't think there is. I think he's a great backup, and he would have been Hunter and I were big on Josh Bates as a starter, but as much as Hickman has played, you got to go that. I just think they're really solid at center right now. That's what I'm going to say. They're really, really solid at center. Hey, Dow Poets. Yeah, there is not a cap by position. There's not.
No. And there's not listen, real quick. The cap thing, there's no cap in how much a player can get paid either.
Correct.
There's no cap in that. The only caps are the roster limits and the scholarship
limits. The total number from the revenue sharing.
Correct. There's no cap on pay.
Yes.
Hey, Jay, I thought that Bobby's correct. Jay, I thought.
Chuck, you're right. 100%.
I listened to Nick Anderson's post-practice interview. I listened to Peyton Bowen's post-practice interview. I really liked, Nick Anderson. I know there's a lot of people who are wondering what Nick Anderson, he really talked a lot about Schmitty. A reporter specifically asked him what was different, because Nick Anderson kept saying, Schmitty really got after us. Our guys responded well. Nick Anderson specifically said this, though, and I thought it tells a lot, Jay and Hunter. He specifically talked about the leadership in the locker room. Obviously, the guys that came back are huge, but I don't think OU's been this good in the leadership category in a very long time.
Well, they've got guys that have been there. I mean, you look at Stutzman, Woody Washington, and Billy Bowman. Not only have they been there 4 years and some 5, they've played that many years. That's totally different than being there. They've been on the field and they didn't come back to have guys slacking off at all. They pushed as hard as they could. And here's the thing too, Schmitty, they're going into the SEC. You knew it was going to be ramped up. I mean, it's a different animal. If you're not ready for SEC, it's going to be shown very quickly this year. And real quick on the cap thing, there will never be a cap on NIL unless they become employees.
Most likely. Yeah.
Right.
And Chuck, to answer, I'm going to kind of change my tune here a little bit, Jay. Based on what you said earlier, it really got me thinking. Yeah, the wheels were turning slowly, but they're returning. The fact that if you want to say there's a watch list, as Chuck says, that Hickman's on the watch list, or that there's more competition, Jay, like you said, they said on the Oklahoma breakdown. Here's what I'm going to say to that. Everyone who's been on Bill Beatonbow's case needs a hush, because what that would be implying is Josh Bates under Bill Beatonbow's tutelage is in a much better place. That's what that would be saying.
True. I mean, Bill Beatonbow develops players. I don't think that can be argued. I don't think anybody.
That's what I would say to that.
And Monty says that, come here to get help from BB to get to the. I did think it was fun to hear Williams and Hickman kind of going back and forth about how much they hated each other last year in that game, and now they're on the same team. So,
and I want to say what. Oh, go ahead, Hunter.
Yeah, real quick, back to Bill Beatonbow. I saw something on Twitter today about top NFL total salaries. We've talked about this a lot. By school, Oklahoma 4th. That's 3rd in the SEC. Alabama at number 1. And I mean, probably I would have to find the exact number, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say half of that money and total salary in the NFL is from Bill Beatonbow's guys. When you're looking at Trent Williams, Lane Johnson, Creed Humphrey. I mean, also in the new Madden game, 3 in the top 10 in terms of the ratings for the video games. Like, Bill Beatonbow is going to get his guys to the NFL. He got more drafted. We talked about it the other night. Tyler Guyton going up against Micah Parsons at practice. I mean, it's just going to keep on continuing year in and year out.
He's going to be Guyton. So
and Dalpo says Dominic Williams said the goal is to be the number 1 defense. Any chance that happens? Here's what I'll say, Dalpo. Not only did Dominic Williams say it, Peyton Bowen said it in the post-practice interview that our goal is to be the number 1 defense in the country. He even alluded saying we were on pace. We were in a good spot last year, and we didn't take care of the little things. They're really focusing on the little things, the small things. But the fact that both those guys said that the goal is to be the number 1 defense, that has not been out of the mouths of Sooner fans. And you can say, well, they've said that in the past. No, they haven't. They have not said that in the past. They're saying it now. It seems to be common language amongst the defensive players. That means it's being said in meeting rooms. That means it's being said at team luncheons. That is the goal. I think they're going to get it. What, Jay?
You're like yelling at me. Hey,
sorry.
Hey, I think I heard something from Danny Stutzman talking about year 3 under Brent Venables, how they feel like they can work other things in because they know the defense so well. It's not like, what can we add? What can we do now? And you got Zach Alley's mind with that. I think Alley's going to play a big role. It's nice to hear that he's going to have that headset with the defensive player in the headset. That's good. I mean, I figured that. But, hey, Keaton, this is a great point, and I do think there's probably some validity to it. I do think some guys love recruiting. Some guys might not like it as much. And I don't know Bill Beatonbow, but maybe he doesn't like recruiting as much a guy like Emmett Jones. I mean, that could be true. There's nothing. But he develops, like you said, develops the heck out of players. So I don't know. Do you think this is interesting. I think Jalen Hurts was an unbelievable locker room guy. I never heard a whole lot about CeeDee Lamb. Did you?
I think CeeDee Lamb is the type of guy, Jay, that you're going to want to do what you're supposed to do because he's going to get up in your face if you don't. I think that's the type of leader CeeDee Lamb was. He led by example. He had high expectations. To me, that's what I see from CeeDee Lamb. Yeah. You still see it today.
I think it was more of a leader within that position group as a whole. And then, I mean, back to that point, I mean, for Oklahoma, it seems like you could pick out multiple leaders that, I mean, could make an argument for them to even be team captains across the board in every position group. I mean, Jackson Arnold, quarterback 1 at OU. I mean, he's obviously going to be one of the biggest leaders on the team. He's really stepping up in that aspect. But, I mean, Nick Anderson as well. It's year 3 for him in the system. I mean, redshirt sophomore year, but year 3. And then the other guys as Stutzman, Bowman, it's year 4, year 3 in the BV system. So I think across the board, you're seeing that a lot.
Dalpo's asking for trivia, Jay.
I agree with Chuck there. Nick is focused, baby. He is. Hey, trivia, I'm going to just going off the top of my head. You're going to have to be quick, though, because this is pretty easy. If you follow OU football at all. But his name was mentioned once or twice today in the media action. But just tell me what number EPL is this year, Eddie Pierre-Louis. What number is EPL? Should be quick. Who's going to be quick with the fingers today? Typing it up.
Yeah, and Bobby, I think that's kind of why you see how Bill Bedenbaugh is very successful in the portal aspect of the recruitment.
I agree.
mean, look at the class. And I mean, this year, potentially 2 starters that were portal additions this winter, this spring, and Branson Hickman and Fabechi and Wiwu. I think that's a lot of it. Those guys that have played college football for a few years are, I mean, more mature at that point. They are that they know that the goal is to get to the NFL. It's not as much about the games that you kind of see in the high school recruiting world.
There's the answer, Bobby Wiley, 55.
3 in a row for Bobby, Jay.
55. Bobby's on a heater.
Bobby is on a heater. He leads right now. His name is on the wheel more than anyone else's name, which means he's got a better chance of winning the tickets to the OU Houston game, courtesy of the Fan Stop. Great seats. Very appreciative of the Fan Stop for donating those seats for you, our viewers. Thanks so much, Fan Stop. Please check them out at thefanstop.com and sign up for the Shirt of the Month Club. I don't know if you can see this one. This the newest one. It is unbelievable. They're all unbelievable. Sign up for the Shirt of the Month Club. They have 2 separate packages. One comes with long sleeve shirts and a couple of hoodies. The other one is straight all short sleeve shirts. But use code SURGE for 10% off your first 3 months. Guys, we are not feeding him in the answers, Chuck. He must be quick on the Google or he's got a photographic memory.
Hey, Jaden Davis, yes, Jaden Davis was one of my favorite players at OU. I just wish he would have panned out a little bit more in game situations. He was always great preseason, but I really like Jaden Davis. And that's the interesting about CeeDee Lamb there. So,
yeah.
So
Hey, Matt.
I count on Bobby. I think that's 6 purely on trivia now, and 3 in a row, I believe is what you just said. So
maybe I need to ask Carter a question. I'm coming with a really hard question tomorrow night. Be ready.
Hey, Surgeaholics, we appreciate you all each and every night, especially tonight, feeding some questions there for Bryan to answer. Appreciate you joining us. It's getting here quicker, guys. I'm getting my OU Missouri tickets tomorrow, boys. So thanks for watching the video. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Make sure you're following our channel. See you tomorrow night. Have a great Friday.